Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. And, Jim, none of them right now have to do with the incoming Congress. By the time most people have heard this, they'll have gone through the roll call of all 430. I guess it's only 434 right now because we still got to resolve that race in North Carolina. Each person will register their vote for Speaker. Most Republicans will vote for Kevin McCarthy. It won't be enough. Nancy Pelosi will have the votes. She'll be Speaker for the second time, which puts her in pretty rare company. A lot of people talking about her in the same sentence as Sam Rayburn today. But what I want to focus on real quickly before we get to our good martini is how many kids in America, whether grown or still young, will be able to describe their mother the way that Alexandra Pelosi does. Alexandra Pelosi is a filmmaker. She was on with John Berman and Allison Camerata on CNN yesterday, and they asked her how she feels about her mother making yet another historical chapter.
Just what are your feelings about this person who you know quite well becoming Speaker of the House for a second time?
She'll cut your head off and you won't even know you're bleeding.
Jim, it's those endearing family thoughts that just like that really give you the warm fuzzies at a moment like this.
I was going to say, I'm willing to bet that Alexandra Pelosi had a really clean room her entire childhood. Always doing her chore. You know, you don't want to know what happened to all my siblings who didn't make it.
Oh, but that does, I think, lend a little insight into why Nancy Pelosi hangs on to power so well. She remembers everything. She knows where the bodies are buried, and that's why she's back on top. Again, hopefully from a conservative perspective for not too long. All right, let's move on to our good martini. And, Jim, we said it yesterday. Now that Jay Inslee looks like he's in, people are going to be dropping out of this thing like flies for the Democratic field in 2020. Martin O'Malley, the two-term former mayor of Baltimore, two-term former governor of Maryland, is not going to run for president. I'm sorry for all of those maybe 36 Martin O'Malley fans around the country. It's not going to happen this time, and he's issued a guest column in the Des Moines Register that he's not going to run for president, but he wants everyone to know who he would like to see run for president and be the Democratic nominee. It's not Joe Biden. It's not Elizabeth Warren. It's not Kamala Harris. It's Beto O'Rourke. Yes, the guy who came in second place in the Texas Senate race last year, but did come quite a bit closer than most people expected. Helped a lot of Democrats down ballot. He goes on to say that when he ran in 2016, his long-shot presidential candidacy did not succeed because America wasn't in the mood for new leadership. I would beg to differ. We were in a mood of anger, rage, and retribution, and in this mood, Donald Trump's candidacy rose. It was good for ratings and good for the Russians, but bad for America, and we got what we got. But he says now there's a different mood in this nation, and he says we need to turn to Beto. In his courageous run for U.S. Senate in Texas, O'Rourke ran a disciplined and principled campaign that also managed to be raw, authentic, and real. He spoke to the American values of honesty, compassion for one another, and courage in the face of a rapidly changing future. These are the American values alive and well in the hearts of our young people. These are the values which tell us where America is headed. And with these values, O'Rourke very nearly defeated the incumbent senator and Republican runner-up for president in Texas. So, Jim, a lot of glowing adjectives there about Beto O'Rourke with very few specifics, which kind of sums up Beto O'Rourke's Senate campaign in 2018. But what do you make of O'Malley, first of all, not getting into this, what is expected to be a very crowded field, and ditching all the experienced people for Beto?
Well, the weird thing, Greg, is that when he submitted the op-ed to the paper, he apparently also had attached his resume and a note saying, "Dear Mr. O'Rourke, please consider me to be your running mate or some other position in your future administration." Very rare that you see such a blatant suck-up in the endorsement, coupled with the announcement that he isn't going to run. Greg, I said this is the good martini because, for starters, I don't have to write another profile of Martin O'Malley. That's what's most important here, and that's really good news. But it does suggest that there's a surprisingly high level of self-awareness on the part of Martin O'Malley. He had, really very minimal impact, if any, on the 2016 Democratic primary. Really no reason to think he's going to have any bigger one in 2020. We may be seeing this weird phenomenon, which the expectation of a giant field ends up discouraging certain, B level, C level, and D level, and I don't know how far into the alphabet you have to get for Martin O'Malley. For perspective, Martin O'Malley is the kind of guy who's, Jay Inslee was saying, who's Martin O'Malley? The idea that, it's going to be really crowded. It's going to be really tough to get media attention. Fundraising is going to be very difficult. Apparently the Democrats want to have everybody on one stage at one time. So I guess it's going to be like a choir on risers or something with all the different podiums. But again, there was really very little reason to think that O'Malley was going to go anywhere. So maybe he thinks he's got some advantage to jumping on the Beto O'Rourke bandwagon early on. The other thing I was thinking about, which I think is another good reason it's good that O'Malley isn't running, he was one of the candidates who took federal matching funds back in 2016. Didn't go anywhere, didn't do particularly good, but roughly $1 million of, I said U.S. taxpayer dollars. And some folks complained and said, well, technically you're volunteering when you check that little box in your tax return. If you check the box, you helped pay the Martin O'Malley campaign about $1 million in the 2016 campaign. And as someone who doesn't want any tax dollars going to these no-hopers, that this is I'm glad he's not running. I hope this discourages other no-hopers from doing so. And I thought about that, Greg. I realized, if you are one of these, B-level, C-level, D-level, candidates with no real chance of getting the nomination, but basically you can treat this, if you like spending a lot of time in Iowa and New Hampshire, in the winters, that may not be quite so much fun, but, you want to sell some books, you want to be on TV a lot, you want to give a lot of speeches, you want to get do a lot of media interviews, you want to get treated like a big shot in some ways for the better part of a year or two. Maybe it's worth it. And, if you reach a certain threshold, the Federal Election Commission will match your donations, making it even easier for you. So there's endless, inducements to run one of these glorified book tours and very little discouragement. So I'm glad O'Malley recognizing that it wasn't even worth doing it for that reason this time around is a good sign, Greg.
And Jim, if I'm not mistaken, this is looking more and more like Bernie might be the only one from the 2016 Democratic field to get in this thing. Now, some people are making noise about Hillary, but we certainly haven't seen much in that direction. I'd be pretty surprised if Jim Webb got back in this thing. O'Malley's out, and unless America gets a hankering for the metric system, I'm guessing Lincoln Chafee's going to sit it out too.
A bad candidate by any metric. Yes, that is correct.
All right, let's move on to our bad martini now, and this is going to be more about sighing than laughing. Yesterday, President Trump held a cabinet meeting. As is usually the case, the cameras come in for a little while. And because Trump is Trump, he had to try and dump on General Mattis, basically saying he fired him, which is, he let him go early instead of letting him stay till the end of February. But Mattis is the one who announced that he was leaving. And then, of course, he proceeded to trash Mattis on his handling of Afghanistan and so forth, which led to this really bizarre rant on what happened with the Soviets in Afghanistan almost 40 to 30 years ago.
Russia used to be the Soviet Union. Afghanistan made it Russia because they went bankrupt fighting in Afghanistan, Russia. So you take a look at other countries. Pakistan is there. They should be fighting. But Russia should be fighting. The reason Russia was in Afghanistan was because terrorists were going into Russia. They were right to be there. The problem is it was a tough fight. And literally they went bankrupt. They went into being called Russia again as opposed to the Soviet Union. A lot of these places you're reading about now are no longer part of Russia because of Afghanistan.
Jim, I think Trump might be a worse history student than Jeff Spicoli. This is not a accurate representation of what happened. From the angle that I took that audio from and watching the video, you could see John Bolton behind him when Trump says the Soviets were right to go into Afghanistan. I would just love to see various thought bubbles of what was going on in John Bolton's mind at that point. There's a lot of things you could say about why the Soviet Union collapsed. Obviously, the defense buildup here in the United States, the pressure put on by the Reagan and Bush administrations. Obviously, they did not do well in Afghanistan, and that certainly hurt them. But the idea that it was a good idea and that the explanation given by the Russians is the right explanation it'd be more disturbing, I think, if somehow he was being fed that line. I just think he has no idea what happened there.
Greg, already I miss John Kelly for his ability to do a facepalm behind the president. There's a bunch that's wrong in there. And I think most notably, no, the Soviet Union did not invade Afghanistan. because of terror attacks. I can't help but get the feeling the president is looking at the current Islamists and Taliban and Al-Qaeda allies and groups like that fighting in Afghanistan and believing that they were always there and that these were who the Soviets were fighting. Thus, the Soviets were kind of the good guys. Greg, I did not expect that the first American president to say that the Soviets were justified to go into Afghanistan would be a Republican. I mean, weird situation when Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter had a lot of flaws, but at least he did kind of get tougher on the Soviet Union after the invasion of Afghanistan. He felt really betrayed, felt like all of his outreach had been punished and all that kind of stuff. So really weird to see this from the president. But the aspect that jumped out to me, and I haven't seen nearly as much commentary about, why isn't Pakistan in there fighting? Well, actually, they are, just not on our side. The Pakistani government, particularly the ISI, is probably the biggest supporter of the Taliban. And people have argued you're never really going to beat the Taliban until the Pakistani government can be persuaded to no longer support them. I think one person summarized it pretty succinctly. There are two Pakistans, and you never know which one you're dealing with. The one that claims to want to modernize and be a force for order and stability in the Muslim world, or the one that is secretly backing the Taliban and seeing it as a useful, foreign surrogate and things like that. For Trump to suggest that Pakistan could be a reliable ally against the Taliban kind of indicates he hasn't paid any attention to any briefing on Afghanistan at all since he became president, and that's really frightening. So that's where we are, Greg. So look, weirdly enough, somebody said to me, "Oh my God, can you believe the president said this?" And the first thought is, yes, I can. There's not a lot that I can find absolutely unbelievable said by this president anymore. And the second thing is that there was a time this would have been really, really disturbing, but we've gotten very, very used to ignoring bizarre things coming out of the president's mouth, haven't we?
So let's go to our crazy martini now. And Jim, let's go all the way back to 2018. It was the midterm elections. The Democrats made a strong point. We're not going to focus on impeachment. We're not going to talk about trying to impeach the president on day one of a democratically controlled House. That would be irresponsible. That's not what we're about. We're about making sure that people with pre-existing conditions can still get their health care. We're making sure that there's a living wage and wage equity and all this other stuff. And that's what they campaigned on. They're down there. They understand what problems the people have, and they're there to address them. They're not there to just run interference for President Trump. Nancy Pelosi even saying fairly recently that they're not going to even think about doing much in terms of impeachment until they get a final report from Bob Mueller. Sounds fairly responsible, right? Well, roll call. Congressman Brad Sherman of California is wasting no time letting President Donald Trump feel the pressure from a democratically controlled House. The California Democrat plans to reintroduce articles of impeachment against Trump on Thursday, the first day Democrats retake a majority they have not enjoyed in the House since 2011. The Los Angeles Times first reported the story. The articles accuse the president of obstructing justice by firing former FBI Director James B. Comey after Comey refused to stop investigating former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Sherman first introduced the articles back in 2017, but they carry more significance now that Democrats will control the House and will force a Congress with a Democratic majority to a vote on the measure. So, Jim, I mean, you get gadflies all the time in the House who want to impeach the president. Remember, Dennis Kucinich did it a bunch in the Bush administration, and even when the Democrats had control, Nancy Pelosi basically ignored him. So people do this to get attention. Al Green from Texas, I know, did this a bunch of times last year and the year before. Nothing happened, obviously, with Republicans in control. But what do you make of the Democrats essentially salivating already just seconds after they're taking the oath of office to move forward on impeachment?
You know, Greg, you and I need to do a special episode based entirely on political cliches I'd like to murder. Not the people themselves who use them, but the cliches themselves. If I could get the neuralizer from Men in Black and get us to all forget them so people stop using them, I would love to see that. I'm sure right now Media Matters is writing Jim Geraghty wishes he could erase history. One of them would be, on my first day, I pledge to introduce X. Because the idea, inevitably they say that, yeah, the crowd in front of them is very excited because it's some sort of priority to this crowd of supporters in front of the candidate. Now, they could do that, but that kind of indicates, the raucous applause indicates they're not that familiar with the process of legislation because just about any elected official can introduce anything. Introduction is the easy part. Introduction really doesn't mean anything. And there are a lot of legislation important sounding legislation has been introduced on the first day, and then it never goes anywhere because it doesn't have the votes or the leadership doesn't like it or something like that. It is the cheapest, easiest applause line, and it does not really indicate any serious thought as to how a particular piece of legislation is going to come to fruition. And then the other thing is also sometimes candidates forget about it because they'll say, my first day. And then the first day is spent with inauguration and ceremonies and all kind of stuff. So lo and behold, they never get around to actually introducing legislation. And it's actually on their second or third day. And then I'm kind of left wondering, Greg, does it really matter if you introduce it on your second or third day? Does it become less of a priority? Are people less special? The only Congress that's ever had a really productive first day was back in 1994. So that was a big part of the contract with America. And, Newt Gingrich and company knew. You could, by the end of your first day, either you could say you had a really, really significant accomplishment, or by the end of the first day, people would say, hey, you made all these promises and you didn't do it. So regarding Trump's impeachment, of course, the Democrats, I would say the Democratic base, but I actually think a pretty broad swath of the Democratic Party really, really wants to see President Trump impeached. I think it's rather revealing that they're not waiting for Mueller. I think it indicates that in the end, this is, I suppose I give them credit for doing that Stephen Covey begin with the end in mind. They're starting with the outcome they want, impeachment, and they're going to work backwards towards the reasons for it and building support for it instead of saying, hey, what is the proper response to this president that we don't like? Unsurprising, the petition for his impeachment was actually started online on January 20th, 2017. I think you make a strong argument to a significant chunk of the Democratic Party. Donald Trump has never been legitimate in their eyes. He is some sort of historical error that they should never permit, and that they, just as I talked about wanting the neuralizer to erase these stupid cliches from political rhetoric, they really wish they could somehow erase President Trump from history. And you know what, guys, it's just not going to work out that way. And if you're going to want to make a case for impeachment, particularly if you want, 67 votes in the Senate, you got to make a much stronger argument than they have right now.
Yeah, absolutely right. So, well done, Democrats. We didn't believe you, and now we're seeing that we were right. So we'll see if how many people jump on the Sherman train here. My guess is quite a few before too long, especially as any more indictments come down from Mueller. If they do, Jim, another crazy day. The Democrats officially control the House now. Buckle up. Going to be a long, bumpy ride.
Can't wait.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.